So I wish you a warm welcome for this wonderful conference the second day. We are happy to be able to start this, and our conference, Women, Water, Climate, Tackling the Challenges, has been a big success. But today we'll find solutions. Yesterday was exciting, where we were able to finish the presentations of the last 2 of the 8 case studies. But more about that later. Women for Water Partnership, in conjunction with its partners NetWwater and Soroptimist International of Southwest Pacific, has organized a series of 8 case study webinars, plus this conference in October and November. These webinars and the conference were made possible through a grant of SEI, Stockholm Environmental Institute, in partnership with the government of Sweden and their Asia's Strategic Collaborative Fund, which aims to foster regional cooperation and policy dialogue for sustainable development and environmental sustainability through capacity building, knowledge sharing, and increased collaboration. Please remember that this session will be recorded. Dr. Teresa Devasham will now give you a short impression of yesterday's conference. Teresa has engaged extensively on women's issue in Southeast Asia for over 25 years, working at the intersection of international development and academic research. She has authored and edited several books and published in numerous international and regional journals. Teresa is currently an international consultant for the Asian Development Bank and continues to teach gender studies. She is the UN representative in Bangkok for Soroptimist International. Teresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ms. Marit Verhoef-Cohen, and that very kind introduction, actually. Now, as many of you know, we had a lineup of excellent speakers yesterday, whose reflections helped us understand the complexities of the confluence between water security and women on the one hand, and how climate change mediates the link on the other. Now, in the opening of this conference, we were honored to have the distinguished Honorary Minister Dinesh Gunawardena share his thoughts on the topic of water security and women, highlighting that while water is a precious resource and women have played an important part in the household in the collection of water, its critical role in our lives has reared its head again in these unsettling times of COVID-19. Now, next, our keynote speaker, Professor Deepak Gyawali, reminded us of the hegemonic relationships embedded in the development agenda and how the disenfranchised and the voiceless struggle to attain water security. Of the solutions, he emphasized a ground-up approach in which the pillar of civic activism takes precedence. He also makes the point that many of the problems related to water security are people-created, and therefore they are only going to worsen with climate change. Now, our attention then turned to 2 very broad topics by the following speakers, by a range of speakers. We had several, I guess, and altogether there were about 8 or 9 speakers. The 2 topics that were delved into were river mining and tea plantations. Now, in terms of the connecting threads between all these presentations, there were recurrent ideas that emerged, one of which was unequal social relationships, and that clearly turned up in the presentations on river sand mining, exploitation and the rape of our resources, which also turned up in, river sand mining, and how at the scalar level you find that there is exploitation, there's abuse because of the lack of regulations. Then you've got peasants versus state apparatus, and the fact that in many countries the relationship is very much unequal, where peasants are being seen as individuals feeding into urban society and urbanites, where the urbanites are the ones who benefit and the peasants are left behind. That too turned up as an idea. And then the repercussions ensuing from an ecosystem imbalance. Now, that access to water is disrupted has rippling effects, in fact, no pun intended, not only on human civilization, but also on our plant life and animal species. Now, the discussions yesterday also emphasized the need to look for alternative resources to replace sand as a staple building material. Now, in today's presentations, we're going to shift a little in our consciousness, and we're going to hear papers presented on the importance of capacity building and raising awareness. Now, having said that, I want to now call upon Ms. Marit Verhoef-Cohen once again to introduce our next panel of speakers in this e-conference. Ms. Verhoef-Cohen, please, the floor is yours again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very nice, and it was a wonderful day. And I think you said it excellent, and in a short period of time. So, what I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Misaka Hitiachi, and he will present a video and an explanation on the voice of water, where Sri Lankan participants highlight climate and water security challenges in remote rural areas and communities affected by issues such as catchment degradation, water pollution, sand mining. And the voice of water comes from community organizations, academia, local government, grassroots political groups, and state agency. And they share experiences and perspectives. So Misaka is a senior fellow in Environmental and Disaster Management Program of the World Wildlife Fund, and adjunct associate professor in the School of Science and Engineering, James Cook University, Australia. His areas of expertise include environmental management and policy, environmental engineering, and disaster management. He has developed guidelines for environmentally responsible disaster management for various projects, specifically on flooding, and he was the expert discussant in our webinar on Kolkata wetlands, women confronting climate change. Misaka, please explain us what the voice of water can contribute to our nexus.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marie. And a warm welcome again to all the participants attending the second and the final day of the WWC conference. With this, can I ask my presentation to be put on? Yeah. So I was supposed to do this presentation as a summary report of the Voice of Water event, which was to be held in Colombo as a one-day program in the lead up to this conference, which was also planned to be held as an in-person event in Colombo. Its objective, the objective of the Voice of Water conference, was to bring together both individuals and groups from across Sri Lanka who raise water-related issues in diverse sectors and also taking initiatives to solve them. It was meant to be a platform for them to meet each other and also to address political and administrative leadership of the water sector of Sri Lanka. But unfortunately, the Voice of Water event initially planned for the 8th of October had to be postponed due to the current rise of COVID-19 cases in Sri Lanka and the health measures taken by the government. To adapt and cope with this new situation, the organizing committee of the Voice of Water event decided to redesign it in a paced manner. Next slide, please. The new design will consist of 3 components, or rather, it's planned to consist of 3 components, as you can see in the slide. First, the water protectors initiatives which were to be presented at the Voice of Water conference, the original one, are being video recorded and made into 1 to 3 minute clips. These can be used in future events and also disseminated online as awareness raising. Second, Voice of Water conference is planned new to be held in December, when the government hopes to ease current restrictions, but in a smaller scale than the original event. It would be subjected to the health guidelines in effect at the time. It is expected to bring about 100 to 150 water protectors together, along with the policy and technical leadership of the water sector of Sri Lanka. Third, given the current difficulties and potential health risks of bringing all the originally intended groups from across the country for a large conference, Voice of Water organizers will go and meet them and hold internet stream discussions, live discussions with them in the original setting. Other groups from across the country can remotely join these meetings and interact with their colleagues. These events, named in Sinhala as Jalayatra, which means water excursions, is planned to be fully video recorded and collated in a website for references by future water protectors. To wrap up my talk, I will play a short video clip with few presentations by the water protector groups to give you an idea of what the Voice of Water event really stands for. This is only a very small sample of the groups. Some videos are still being edited, some are yet to be recorded, but hopefully we will be able to resume the video recording and complete all the videos as soon as the current restrictions are lifted. Can I go to the next and the final slide, please? These issues discussed by the water protector groups and their initiatives pan across all along the watershed. For example, from the need to protect the high mountain ecosystems, such as the Knuckles mountain range in Sri Lanka, in the Central Hills, to issues like acute destruction of coastal wetlands in the periphery of Colombo. They demonstrate the fragility of the downstream water security, including its impacts on major irrigation and power infrastructure, such as the Mahaweli scheme in Sri Lanka, and ultimately the blow on the national income and the income security. The Voice of Water program aims to help these water protectors to understand their issues and initiatives in multiple aspects and in a watershed perspective, as also present them with possibilities of combining engineering and nature-based solutions. Most of the examples presented here, can I go to the next slide, please? Sorry, this wasn't the last slide. The next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, the next one. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. Most of the examples presented here highlight the importance of community in decision making and critical need for community engagement for climate adaptation. They also demonstrate the disproportionate burden on women related to water security and the pivotal role of women in resolving these water crises. These examples tell us water can act as a stimulant for community engagement and empowerment. They also show that water management done in a toad's eye view, to use Professor Gewali's wise words from yesterday, can not only help in adapting to climate change, but also mitigate it. It is with this view that the Voice of Water program is committed to giving voice to these water protectors. Thank you. I hope you will enjoy the short video showing just some of these examples, which should be shown now. Thank you.
නකල්ස් කඳු කරේ ගත්තොත් නකල්ස් කියන්නේ ඊටාම් වටිනා දුම්බර කඳු යාව එහෙම නැත්නම් දුම් වලින් බර වුණ එහෙම නැත්නම් දූම් ගස් වලින් බර වුණ කඳු වලින් කඳු පන්තියකින් හෙබි සුවිශේෂී පරිසර පද්ධතියක්. එතකොට ලෝකයේ එක්සත් ජාතීන්ගේ සංවිධානය මගින් ප්‍රකාශයට පත් කරා ස්වභාවික සහ සංස්කෘතික උරුමයන් කියන සම්මුතිය යටතේ ලංකාවේ ස්ථාන 8ක් ප්‍රකාශයට පත් කරලා තියෙනවා. එයින් අවසාන වශයෙන් ප්‍රකාශයට පත් කරේ සෙන්ට්‍රල් හයිලන්ඩ්ස්. එහෙම නැත්නම් මැද කඳුකරය කියන කොටස. ඒතකොට ලෝක උරුමයක් හැටියට අද මේ නකල්ස් කඳුකරය, ශ්‍රීපාද අඩවිය, රක්වාන සහ හෝටන් ඇතුළු අඩි 5000ට ඉහළ කඳු කොටස අයත් වෙනවා. එහිදී නකල්ස් අඩි 5000 නොවුනත් නකල්ස් සහ සෙන්ට්‍රල් හයිලන්ඩ්ස් කියන විදිහට තමයි එය ප්‍රකාශයට පත් කරේ ලෝක උරුමයක් හැටියට. නමුත් අවාසනාවකට වගේ මෙම ලෝක උරුමයක් කියන දේ අපේ බොහෝ දෙනා අද වෙනකොට නොසලකා හැරලා තියෙන්නේ. මේක ඉතාම වැදගත් වෙනවා ආර්ථික පැත්තෙන්, ඒ වගේම ජල පෝෂක පැත්තෙන්, ඒ වගේම ජෛව විවිධත්වය පැත්තෙන්, ආවේනිකභාවය, ඒ වගේම අපේ සංස්කෘතික පැත්තෙන් වගේ අංශ ගණනාවකින් නකල්ස් කඳුකරය අපිට වැදගත් වෙනවා. මහවැලි ගඟට එකතු වෙන අවසාන වශයෙන් එකතු වෙන ජල කොටස් ගත්තාම එයින් 3/1 133ක් නකල්ස් කඳුකරින් පමණයි මේ දායාද කරන්නේ. එතකොට ඒක ඊටාම වටිනා සම්පතක්. මොකද අනාගතයේදී මේ රටේ අපිට අපනයනය කරන්න පුළුවන් ප්‍රධානම වටිනා වස්තුවක් තමයි ජලය කියන එක. ජල සම්පත කියන එක අනාගතයේදී එන්න අඩු වෙලා බීමට ගන්නා ජලය කියන එකට අනාගතයේදී රත්තරන් වගේ වටිනාකමක් එනවා. ඒ නිසා මෙම ජලය අපි ආරක්ෂා කරගන්න ඕන, සංරක්ෂණය කරගන්න ඕන අනාගත පරම්පරාව වෙනුවෙන් වගේම අපේ රටේ ආර්ථික වෙනුවෙන්. ඒ වගේම අපේ කෘෂිකර්මාන්තය පහළ කෘෂිකර්මාන්තයේ බොහෝ දෙයට රැඳිලා තියෙන්නේ මෙම ජලය මත. ඒ වගේම මෑතකදී ඇති කරපු ජල ව්‍යාපෘති දෙකක් වෙනවා, කළුගංග සහ මෘගහකන්ද. ඒ ජලාශ දෙකට යන විශාල ජල ප්‍රමාණයක් වැඩි කොටසක්ම එන්නේ මෙම නකල්ස් කඳුකරේ.
සාමසාර කන්දේ සිදුවෙච්ච නායෑම ලංකාවේ අපි දන්න ඉතිහාසයේ වෙච්ච ඉතාමත්ම දරුණු ඛේදවාචකයක්. මම හේමන්ත සෙනවිරත්න හැට නැෂනල් බැංකුවේ තිරසාර ව්‍යාපෘති අංශයේ සේවය කරන්නේ. මේ සාමසාර කන්දේ නායෑමෙන් පස්සේ අපි තොරතුරු හොයලා බලනකොට අපි දැක්කා මේ නායෑමට හේතු වෙච්ච දෙයක් තමයි මේ ප්‍රදේශයේ වන විනාශය ඉතා දැඩිව සිද්ධ වෙලා තිබුණා. ඒත් එක්කම ඉතා දැඩි වර්ෂාපතනයක් ලැබුණා. හැටන් නැෂනල් බැංකුව තිරසාර සංවර්ධන අරමුණු කරා තිරසාර සංවර්ධන අරමුණු සාක්ෂාත් කර ගැනීම වෙනුවෙන් කැපවුණු ආයතනයක්. මේ අරණායක නායෑමෙන් පස්සේ අපි ඒ ප්‍රදේශයට ගිහිල්ලා ශ්‍රී ලංකා ජල සංසදයත් සමග ව්‍යාපෘතියක් කරා වැසි ජලය සංරක්ෂණය කරන්න. ඇයි අපි මේ වැසි ජලය සංරක්ෂණය කරන්න ව්‍යාපෘතියක් අරණායක ප්‍රදේශයේ පටන් ගන්න. බැංකුකරුවෙක් විදිහට ආයෝජන ප්‍රතිලාභ කියන එක අපිට ඊටාම වැදගත්. අපි මොනවා හරි ආයෝජනයක් කරනවා නම් අපි ඒකේ ප්‍රතිලාභයක් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. මේ සාමසාර කන්දේ නායෑමත් එක්ක අපි දැකපු දෙයක් තමයි මේ ප්‍රදේශවල තියෙනවා විශාල ප්‍රශ්නයක් මේ නාය ගියාට පස්සේ පොළවේ තියෙන ජල උල්පත් ජල පද්ධති වෙනස් වෙනවා. ඒ වෙනස් වුණාම ලිං හිදෙනවා, ජල මූලාශ්‍ර හිදෙනවා. සමහර වෙලාවට ඒ වතුර අපි ලබා ගන්න විශාල ජල මූලාශ්‍ර පවා හිදෙනවා. ඉතින් එහෙම වුණාම අපිට හරිගස්සල තියෙන නල පද්ධතියෙන් උනත් වතුර අඛණ්ඩව ලබා ගන්න බැරි තත්වයක් ඇති වෙනවා. මේ වැස් ජල කළමනාකරණ ව්‍යාපෘතිය තුලින් අපි කරන්න උත්සාහ කරේ ඒ ප්‍රදේශයේ මිනිසුන්ට මෙන්න මේ තත්ත්වය පිළිබඳ අවබෝධයක් ලබා දීලා ඒ වගේම මේ තෙත් කලාපේ අපිට මාස 7-8ක් හොඳට වහිනවා. ඒ වහින වැස්ස නිසි පරිදි ප්‍රයෝජනයට අරගෙන ඒකෙන් අපිට අපේ ජලයට යන වියදමත් අඩු කරලා අපිට වඩාත් කළමනාකාරී විදිහට ඒ ජලයෙන් ප්‍රයෝජන ගන්න පුළුවන් ආකාරය මේ මිනිසුන්ට පෙන්වා දීමක් තමයි අපි කරන්න උත්සාහ ගත්තේ. ඉතින් අපි ඉස්කෝල 10ක වැසි ජල ටැංකි හරි ගැස්සුවා. ඒවයි ඒ ජලය අපවිත්‍ර නොවි පිරිසිදු ජලයක් රැස් කරගන්න ක්‍රමවේදයක් හරි ගස්සලා දුන්නා. ඒ ළමයින්ට ඒවට අවශ්‍ය පුහුණුව ලබා දුන්නා. ඒ ප්‍රදේශයේ අවට ප්‍රදේශයේ තියෙන ජල මූලාශ්‍ර ආශ්‍රිතව රුක්රෝපණ වැඩසටහනක් කරලා ඒ ජල මූලාශ්‍ර ආරක්ෂා කරගන්නත් ඒ අපේ ආයෝජනයෙන් කොටසක් අපි වැය කරා.
මේ වෙලාවේ මම අධ්‍යයනය කරගෙන ඉන්නේ උමාඔය පහළ නිම්නය ගැන. මේ තියෙන්නේ හඳපානගල ජලාශයේ සිටියම දැනට මේ හඳපානගල ජලාශයේ දකුණු ඉවුරේ වැඩි දියුණු කිරීම වාරි මාර්ග දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව මගින් කරගෙන යනවා. නමුත් තියෙන පරණ වම්මැලේ මේ වෙනකොට වගාව සඳහා ජලය නිකුත් කරනවා. වම්මැලේ කන්න දෙකේ වගාව සඳහා ජලය නිකුත් කරමින් මේ වෙනකොට මහකන්නේ වගාව ආරම්භ කිරීමට කටයුතු කරමින් පවතී. මම ජානකී මීගස්තැන්න මම වාරි මාර්ග දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ අතිරේක වාරි මාර්ග අධ්‍යක්ෂ ජෙනරාල් ඉදිකිරීම හා සංවර්ධන. මේ වෙනකොට වාරි මාර්ග දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් දලදාරා ප්‍රදේශවල ජලය සංරක්ෂණය කරගන්න, මුහුදට ගලාගෙන යන ජල ප්‍රමාණය අවම කරගන්න, ගංගා හරස් කරලා ජලාශ ඉදි කරනවා. මේන් සමහර ඒවා තියෙන පද්ධති වලට ජලය දෙනවා. සමහර ජලාශවල මගින් වෙනත් ගංගා ද්‍රෝණි වලට ජලය හරවා යවනවා. ජලය කියන එක සීමිත සම්පතක්. මේකට දැන් වෙනකොට බොහෝ ගැටලු රාශියකට මුහුණ පාන්න සිද්ධ වෙලා තිබෙනවා. කාලගුණ විපර්යාස, දේශගුණික බලපෑම්, ඒ වගේම මිනිස් ක්‍රියාකාරකම්, ඉහළ ජලධාරා ප්‍රදේශවල ඇති වෙලා තියෙන වෙනස් කිරීම, විශේෂයෙන් භූමි සම්පත වෙනස් කිරීම, මේ වගේ නිසා ජල සම්පත ගැටලු රාශියකට මුහුණ දීලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඉදිකරණ හා සංවර්ධනය කිරීමට පමණක් මූලිකත්වයේ ලබා නොදෙමින් ඉහළ ධාරා ප්‍රදේශ ගැනත් වාරි මාර්ග දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව විශේෂ අවධානයක් යොමු කරනවා. නමුත් මේ සඳහා ලංකාවේ සිටින සියලුම දෙනාගේ සහයෝගය අත්‍යවශ්‍ය බව මම ප්‍රකාශ කර සිටිනවා.
I am Krishna Meera Sahib, irrigation engineer from Eastern Province. I could say I'm the daughter of a farmer's family. Okay, in my childhood, I always spend my lesser time in the paddy fields. We have plenty of pure water, so we have used it. Still we are using, but there are some issues. We couldn't do the 2 seasons. In the past, in our village, the farming community and the farmers are the wealth and the richest. They are the leaders of our village. But now the trend is going in a different way, in a negative way, because most of the farmers they are now leaving from the agriculture because they are moving to business and some other things. And the young people also, they are not putting their interest onto that. There are some issues because due to the high intensity rainfall, everything is flooded. So when he is a wealth man, after a flood, it is zero. He is nothing. So yeah, he is losing everything. That's why the people are moving to another place. And the rehabilitation also, it is must to our area, because when we are rehabilitating, we can do the both season in a successful manner. And the paddy price is also an important one. It is not because the poor farmers, they are going to sell for a very low price, so they are not getting the profit, but the mill owners and the rice mill owners only, they are earning a lot.
අපේ මුතුන්වත්තෝ ආතිකාලේ ඉඳලා වැසි ජල රැස්කිරීමේ ක්‍රමවේදය ඉතා වැදගත් බව සැලකලා තියෙනවා. මගේ නම තනුජා ආර්යනන්ද. මම ලංකා වැසි ජල රැස්කිරීමේ සංසදයේ විධායක අධ්‍යක්ෂකත්. වැසි ජල රැස්කිරීම කියන්නේ වැසි කාලෙට වැස්ස එකතු කරලා වැසි නැති කාලෙට භාවිතා කිරීමක්. මේ ක්‍රමවේදය අපේ අතීතයේ ඉඳලා අපේ මුතුන්වත්තෝ පාවිච්චි කරපු ක්‍රමයක්. අපි 1997 ලංකා වැසි ජල රැස්කිරීමේ සංසදය බිහි කරනකොට වඩා මේ ක්‍රමවේදය දැන් වැදගත් වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම දේශගුණ පර්යාසන සමගම වහිනකොට ගොඩක් වහිනවා. ඒත් එක්කම වහි නැති කාලේ ගොඩක් දිග වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් විනීග කාලෙන් වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් මේ ක්‍රමවේදය ගොඩාක් වැදගත්, විශේෂයෙන්ම කාන්තාවන්ට ඉතින් ඒගොල්ලෝගේ එදිනෙදා ජලය ලබා ගැනීමට මේ ක්‍රමවේදය ඉතා වැදගත් වෙනවා.
මේ සුන්දර බොල්ගොඩ ජලපෝෂිත ප්‍රදේශය. මේ මම පාසල් වියේදී නාන්නාපු ලස්සන සුන්දර පරිසරය. අවිධිමත් සංවර්ධනය සහ මිනිස් අවිධිමත් ක්‍රියාකාරකම් නිසා අද මේක අමුතු පැත්තට පත් වෙලා මේ තියෙන්නේ ඒවැ ප්‍රතිඵල. අද අපි පාසල් කාලේ දැක්ක සුන්දරත්වය මෙතන නැහැ. පරිසරය විනාශ කරපු අසුන්දර අතීතයට දීලා අපි හෙට ඉඳන් පටන් ගන්න නම් පළාත් පාලන ආයතන වල තියෙන බලවත් පනත මේව ආරක්ෂා කරන්න හොඳටම ප්‍රමාණවත්. හැබැයි ඊට එහන් තියෙන මධ්‍යම රජය, රේකී අමාත්‍යාංශය, පළාත් සභාවේ තියෙන රේකී අමාත්‍යාංශය පළාත් පාලන ආයතනවලට ඉඩහසර වෙන් කළ දීලා, ප්‍රතිපාදන වෙන් කළ දීලා නිවැරදි දැක්මක් දෙනවා නම් මේක නැවත ඒ තත්ත්වයට ගන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ඒ සඳහා රජය පමණක් ප්‍රමාණවත් නැහැ. සිවිල් සංවිධාන, මහජන සංවිධාන, ඒ වගේම විශේෂයෙන් මම මතක් කරන්න කැමතියි මේ ක්‍රියාකාරකම් වෙනුවෙන් සැබෑවටම හඬ නගන රාජ්‍ය නොවන සංවිධාන සියල්ල ඒකරාශී කරගෙන මේ ව්‍යාපෘති සහ වාර්තා ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම තුළින් මේ බිම එදා මම දැක්ක බොල්ගොඩ ගඟ හෙට මගේ දරුවටත් ඇවිල්ලා බලන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. අනාගතයට මේ තෙත්බිම් ආරක්ෂා වෙයි.
නකල්ස් කඳුකරේ ගත්තොත් නකල්ස් කියන්නේ ඊටාම් වටිනා දුම්බර
Thank you very much, Misika. This was very enlightening, and I wish you really all the luck to organize this further Voice of Water to give everyone, every stakeholder, a voice in this national issue in Sri Lanka. So today we focus on the way forward and the lessons learned. And we need your input, your voices, your questions and your opinion. So please use the question and answers for our discussions after we have started the discussion and lessons learned. So what we'll do now is, with a panel, we will discuss the outcome of the 8 case study webinars on the lessons learned, and we have invited 3 experts. So please remember to think of questions and to make remarks, and we'll discuss these remarks and your solutions after the presentation of our 3 experts. I think we will start with Deepa. Deepa Joshi is the Gender, Youth and Inclusion Lead at WLE and International Water Management Institute. a feminist political ecologist by training, and her research has analyzed shifts in environmental policies and how these restructure contextually complex intersection of gender, poverty, class, ethnicity, and identity. Her interests lie in connecting gender and environmental discourse to local capacity building initiatives and advocating for policy relevant change across development institutions. So Deepa, the floor is yours.
Marriott, Kusum, and everybody else, greetings. And thank you so much for inviting me to this session and to allow time for reflecting on these very interesting, fascinating case studies. So I just want to focus on two key issues. Firstly, going into the next slide, I think that although this whole series has been called Women, Water, and Climate Change, however, what I find when I look into these presentations, the videos, as well as the written summaries of these case studies, what I find is that it's really about women's water roles, responsibilities, relationships, which take place in a complex contextual web of social relations, which really identify, as the West Bengal case study pointed out, that it's really about corridors of power that exist at different institutional levels. So I think maybe this whole series of case studies really points to the fact that this is more than just about women and water. Second, although the word climate is there, what I also find very, very interesting is that all of the case studies talk about persisting inequality and inequity in water quantity as well as water quality, as the Nepal case study pointed out. So this is much more than an outcome of climate impact. And as COVID-19 has shown that there are gross inequalities in access to water supply and sanitation, which have really affected rural and urban communities, especially the marginalized amongst them. This brings me to the third point. What I found very, very fascinating in the case studies was that all of these showed marginalization and vulnerability in very different contexts and situations. What the case studies also pointed out, most of them, were that the marginalization and vulnerability is so entrenched that it requires mediating organizations like yourselves, the various organizations who have led this work, to try and intervene to improve water supply and sanitation or access to water for irrigation. This really raises the question about accountability. So who is accountable for meeting, for achieving water supply and sanitation goals and targets? So clearly the MDGs have failed, and the SDGs would also probably enter into a similar situation if we don't really look at this overall issue of accountability, because the point that I want to make here is that we cannot intervene in every community which is currently underserved or unserved with water supply and sanitation. And I think this question of financing that was raised in one of the webinars is really interesting. So who finances water supply and sanitation? And how sustainable will these one-off interventions be that have been sometimes financed by private companies like the Heineken in one of the case studies? So this really also then leads me to my fourth point, which is really about the political economy of water. Who is accountable? Who's financing? Is it going to to be sustainable, but also broader issues of corridors of power. So I found the sand mining case in Sri Lanka very, very important. So what I also found very interesting is this Malaysian case study where, the logging companies are themselves responsible for severe deterioration of water quality and quantity in these areas, and yet the local community seems to rely on these logging companies, because there was reference to the point that vegetables grown with the improved water supplies being then sold in these water camps, which does provide an income to these households. So yes, immediate gains, but then this really raises the larger question of financing as well as sustainability. Finally, my second broad point is focusing on gender and social inclusion. And I have a couple of points here. So all the case studies were really very interesting in showing that women have capabilities and women are able to take on water management roles and responsibilities, sometimes even, negotiating and bargaining with local government, private sector, etc., in the various case studies. But the question that I really want to ask all the presenters is that, how does this impact on the women? Does it create additional burdens? What sort of gains does it really produce? And I found the West Bengal case study very interesting, that the women intervened and got access to irrigation, improving the irrigation water supply. But then the question is, will that improve women's access to land and other resources, which the case study pointed out was certainly not in women's favor? And the point that I want to raise here is that when we talk about women and water, I think we need to be reminded of the fact that there is an overwhelming feminization of responsibilities and obligations, as Sylvia Chant points out in one of her publications. And so how do these interventions that focus on women improve that? And I think what I found very interesting is this wetland study in Kolkata, which pointed out that, women can still have control over certain aspects of livelihoods without really getting into maybe tasks that are, gendered, and that there are some areas that there can be a transformation in what women can do and men can do, but then also there are some areas of protection for women which seems to serve women well. So I think it's interesting to reflect on that. This really brings me to the point that has been talked about quite a lot in 2020, starting right at the beginning of the year in a conference at the World Economic Forum, where it was discussed that gender transformative approaches, which is what we want to move towards, is really about not fixing women so that they can fit into the systems of corridors of power, but really about fixing institutions or fixing these corridors of power so that they are more inclusive. So I think that is a point of reflection, that how do we want to intervene in relation to women, water, and climate, so that we fix institutions and we restore equity in these corridors of power. That also brought me to this other issue that I noted, is that a lot of the case studies talk about local community, women, youth, sometimes maybe in ways that tend to homogenize these. And I think it's really important to also think about intersectional inequalities. Who are these women who can participate and who can negotiate, and who is excluded from these elements of participation and engagement in water improvement? So again, once more, coming back to an IRC study that talked about financing WASH, and pointing out where the study pointed out that the responsibility for financing sustainable WASH, requires financing by the government. and that community financing by itself tends to not be sustainable and also tends to exclude the poorest. So I think the point that I want to end here with is that improved water supply and sanitation in whatever way, as these case studies show, really bring about an improvement in women's lives, for sure. But then it also raises issues about should the poorest and most marginalized of women or youth be made responsible for taking on what is actually a public sector responsibility for which the government should be accountable or development institutions should be accountable? And how do we make sure that we do not legitimize these inequitable investments and innovations in WASH? So that's the point that I want to end with. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. That was, sorry about the sound. I don't know if that came from our side or from your side, but this was very enlightening, Deepa. So thanks, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions and remarks on your summary in a way. So our second panelist is Lawrence Toohey, a gender and communication consultant at the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, and he's doing that already since 2014. He holds a master's degree in earth, surface, and water, and his main expertise is in hydrology and sustainability related matters such as integrated water resources management, environmental engineering, and sustainable development. Lawrence, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Mariette, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I would like to welcome everyone once more, and ready to start the presentation. So as Mariette already introduced me, my name is Lawrence Toohey, and I'm a gender and communication specialist at the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program. Today, as a part of this expert panel, I will be giving you this short presentation on case studies and women's undeveloped potential in water. Next slide, please. A very short overview. I would like to touch on a few key issues here. First, I would like to briefly go back to some key issues that were presented in the case studies in the last weeks. Then I would like to share with you the work that WWAP has been doing so far to close this critical data gap on water and gender. And then I will discuss two specific examples that show the importance of gender data and end with some concluding remarks. Next, please. So in these 8 case studies that have been presented during the run-up to this conference, I identified a number of key issues that hold back sustainable development and the achievement of gender equality. First of all, in many countries, women have a limited role in water management and decision-making with respect to men. This, of course, has significant implications upon the decision-making outcomes. For example, policies often lack gender considerations and therefore disproportionately impact women and girls. Secondly, this also has an important impact on education, with girls more at risk of leaving school after primary and therefore not completing their education. Third, there is an urgent need for enhancing community awareness and advocacy in topics related to gender equality and sustainable development, that in turn can lead to behavioral changes within these very communities and even households. Equally, vocational training is really of critical importance for women and youth in order to enhance their literacy, their technical skills, and eventually leading to better job opportunities. And finally, there exists a pronounced lack of sex disaggregated data on all these issues, but this data is critical to move forward. So I see we already moved to the next slide. So let me start with briefly discussing why water and gender is relevant. Of course, we are pretty familiar with this, I assume. Anyway, we all know that water is intrinsically connected to life, and it stands central in our society, culture, economy, and even spirituality. For this, the access to clean water is a requirement to meet basic human rights. And exactly in this, the aspect of gender comes into play, because everyone should have the same rights to water, which unfortunately in practice is often not the case, with certain groups of people being excluded. Gender causes individuals to have a different relation with water. Just think about the different water-related tasks for both men and women. For example, women and girls often being the responsible for water collection, having consequences on their education, work, and even health. So exactly for this, we need to make sure that water assessment includes the gender perspective. Next, please. So to wrap up, 6 good reasons to collect sex disaggregated data. First of all, we needed to understand women's and men's different needs and strengths. Secondly, we needed to assess who has access to and control over water resources, to understand the complexity of gender relations, to assess the barriers and constraints to project implementation, to assess the potential of projects to empower women, and last but not least, to inform gender policies. Next, please. So exactly to address the current lack in this sex disaggregated data, WWAP started in 2014 with the first ever initiative to achieve a global standard for gender responsive water assessment, monitoring, and reporting. And a major output of this initiative were the WWAP toolkits on sex disaggregated water data. The first edition was released in 2015. It consisted out of 4 tools with 40 indicators in 5 priority topics. Then in response to field testing and the release of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, the 2019 edition was produced. Next, please. As you can see, it also consists out of 4 tools. First, there's the indicators containing 105 gender responsive indicators according to 10 priority topics. The second is the methodology that describes the conceptual pillars of the methodology for the collection of sex disaggregated data. Then thirdly, there are the guidelines, which consider the data collection methods and also cover the needs and the focus area of a wide range of users, making it possible to apply it in the whole world. And finally, the last tool is a questionnaire that has over 400 questions that can be selected by users to collect data in the field. Next, please. So as you can see, these are the indicator priority topics. And indeed, many of these issues that were discussed in the case studies and that I referred to earlier, such as the limited role of women in water-related decision-making, or unequal opportunities of women and girls to attend school and training, the disproportionate impact of climate change-related effects on women's life on a daily basis, but also the importance of involving women in awareness raising and community initiatives. Well, all these topics are included in the WWAP gender responsive indicators, making it possible to collect data on these very important issues. Next, please. So let's move to the specific example that shows the importance of sex disaggregated data in the relation between gender, water, and climate change. So climate change mainly impacts societies through changes in the availability and distribution of water with respect to location and time. But unfortunately, climate change also impacts, it also aggravates the already existing water-related challenges. And some examples among those are It causes damage to drinking and stormwater infrastructure. It causes a reduced water availability for domestic purpose, as well as agriculture and industry. It reduces crop yields and can lead to malnutrition, and has a bunch of adverse health effects due to this malnutrition. But it also increases the prevalence of waterborne diseases and may disrupt health services. And lastly, it can even cause the loss of human lives. So with this, we have to bear in mind that women have been shown to be more affected in comparison to men when it comes to these impacts of climate change on their lives. A few examples are, for example, the increase in women's domestic burden, which includes water fetching, a larger exposure to water containing pollutants or pathogens, and a higher risk to even lose their life during water-related disasters. And that's just a few among many examples. So this again reinforces the already urgent need for having universal access to wash facilities, and also reinforces the call for reliable and timely sex-aggregated data to be able to understand and respond to these gender differences in the face of these different challenges. In addition, it also underlines the need for capacity building to further mainstream crucial water and gender knowledge as an important adaptation measure in the face of climate change. Next slide, please. So let's now take a look at a very particular example from Sri Lanka. Located in the southwest of Sri Lanka, the Sinharaja is the country's last viable area of primary tropical rainforest. It's not only the headwater of few of Sri Lanka's main rivers, such as the Nilwala and Ginganja, but also from a biodiversity point of view, it's unique. Over 60% of the trees there are endemic, and many are considered to be rare. The reserve is also home to more than 50% of Sri Lanka's endemic species of fauna. But sadly, the area is under threat due to, for example, illegal encroachment, mining, logging, and even road construction that is resulting in habitat degradation. And due to these very developments, the area is at risk of losing its status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site that it achieved as early as 1988. In addition to this, the overuse of agrochemicals in the tea plantations bordering the forest can lead to the pollution of streams and rivers and also impact human health. Well, actually, 90% of Sri Lanka's population has access to water, but only 43% of those in the estate sector that includes these plantations have access. And although both men and women living in the areas are affected, women especially bear the brunt of it as they are responsible again for the fetching of water, often with children. And in addition, these agrochemicals from the tea plantations pollute the very water resources that they depend on and can lead to health impacts. Next, please. So I would like to conclude with the presentation, but I would like to give some very last recommendations that we should keep in mind in order to be able to achieve sustainable development, and in particular, to achieve the SDGs 3, 5, 6, 10, 13, and 17, as you can see outlined here in the slide. First of all, the involvement of women and youth is really essential in natural resources related management and decision making, but equally in the design, execution, and evaluation of projects. There's an urgent need to further mainstream gender into water mechanisms or forums on all levels to ensure that women's voices are heard and they can meaningfully participate in decision making. On top of women's and youth involvement, also crucial is to have an improved dialogue between communities and institutions. And equally important is to ramp up capacity development on gender-related key issues for achieving all the above. So I think it's safe to say that data is absolutely crucial to inform evidence-based decision-making and policies, and therefore that the current gender data gap needs to be urgently overcome. Only like this, we can ensure evidence-based policies to in turn promote gender equality and sustainable development in the long run. Next slide. So I would like to thank you very much for attending and once more for the invitation. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm looking forward to receiving your questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you. That was very nice to see, and again, very enlightening to go back to all these different webinars that we already had. Of course, there are already some questions, but before we continue, we will first go to to Lisa to get her perspective of the Lisa, you are a gender expert. You are the gender expert in communication for Global Water Partnership, and we would really be interested in hearing what your thoughts are on what we have sort of shown in these different 8 webinars. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marit, and thank you, the conference organizers. So my name is Lisa de Bivets, and I am a gender and social inclusion specialist at Global Water Partnership organization in Stockholm. Global Water Partnership, as you know, or as many of you may know, is an organization that works on influencing and supporting governments and partners across the globe in 13 regions around the world, with around 60 plus country water partnerships, supporting work on improving IWRM governance in an inclusive and equitable way. And our gender and social inclusion work is based around 4 principles that we call gender action areas. And I'm gonna post this in the chat, a link to information about these four areas. So if you look into the chat, I've listed the 4 action areas, and I provided the link to the document so that you can, because I figured that if I put a PowerPoint, you cannot click on the PowerPoint, but if I put it in the chat, you can actually click on it and see the document there. So the action areas that we're working on reflect a lot of the things that Deepa and Lawrence actually mentioned now in their presentations. A lot of it is echoing what they're saying, so it's not really new what I'll be telling you. But the areas that we're focusing on are first to ensure that there's institutional leadership and commitment to gender, meaning that organizations have to make gender equality and inclusion a core business goal. Without that, there is not going to be any gender transformative change happening. Second area is that gender and inclusion analysis drive the change, basically collecting sex disaggregated data, making that we have gender and inclusion analysis happening at all levels. Without this information, any decisions that we make may actually further harm the people we're working with. A third area we're working on is, we call it a nothing about them without them approach, basically making sure that there's meaningful and inclusive participation of women, youth in decision-making processes and partnerships, so that the projects are designed together with the end users in mind. And finally, the action area 4 is the equal access to control of equal access to the resources and control of these resources, so that we create a level playing field with respect to access and control of the resources. So this is just a little bit about the work that Global Water Partnership works on, for those of you who don't know it. And Global Water Partnership is very happy to be associated with this with this event today. And we work closely with teams in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Some of our colleagues have participated in the events over the last few days. And so we are very happy to be associated with this work. And I'm also very excited as a new person at GWP. I'm only with the organization since 5 months, to be working towards new projects together with colleagues in the region. Kusum and I have been having some conversations about how we can take things forward, also with our regional partnership coordinators, Lal and Fani. All of us are very excited about pushing the gender agenda forward in our work. As I was asked to make some comments on the case studies, on the webinars that have been taking place over the month of October, I was trying to see, you know, what can I bring to the conversation? And I didn't want to do a PowerPoint presentation teaching people about something that I don't really know of. You know, I have to say I am a gender person, but of course I'm not a specialist on the region of Asia. I've done a lot of work in Sub-Saharan Africa for the last 20 years. So I feel to a certain point, you know, that I'm not in a position to be judging some of the issues that were presented. But what really touched me in the webinars that I've seen is that in so many ways they address all the levels that are required in order to achieve gender transformative change, starting from really this engagement with the communities at the grassroots level, and especially addressing the issue of education. I was when I was looking at the presentation, the webinar from the Drink Pani project in Nepal, for example, I felt like it really had all the levels. It had the engagement of the young boys and girls in these clubs where they have the ability to get engaged in what is a certain level of a science project, and that girls have equal opportunity as boys to be part of this. Then we had the young club members participating in the webinar. So they had this opportunity for public speaking, which is often not given to young women or even women, you know, even sort of women at different levels or in the water sector, which is often still very much dominated by men. And I think that that's also very interesting for me, because when we look at gender transformation, and a lot of the organizations, international organizations, we focus on the people we're supposed to help change. We're building capacity of women in the farms, we're coming to empower them, but we rarely look at what we're doing inside our organizations to create opportunities for young women in the water sector or in the development sector that we're working in. And then we come to the moment where we're looking for a director or a chair of our organization, and we always select men for these positions, and we say there are no women who are qualified to be in these positions. And it made me think about whether we are actually creating opportunities for women to be at the forefront of these discussions, giving them opportunities to be seen as leaders in this sector, and then giving them the chance to then lead formally in these organizations. So I felt that a lot of the webinars with young women researchers talking about their research in the water sector, and then the young water specialists that you had invited to comment on all the webinars. I felt that that was a particularly important element of this work that we're doing, because again, I really want to stress this thing. It's the internal work, not fixing women, but fixing the systems. And by fixing the system, we need to create these opportunities for women to shine in public context, because we still today have panels where we have a climate panel and we have 6 men talking about issues that touch all the population, meaning men and women. And there are not just men experts in this field. So that was something that I was really struck by when I was listening to the presentations. And another thing that I wanted to say was, as I was thinking about what I was going to say, I listened to a podcast that was unrelated to water, but it was about women empowerment. It was a podcast with the Zimbabwean woman empowerment champion, Dr. Tererai Trent. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with Dr. Tererai Trent, but she was a woman from rural Zimbabwe who at the age of 18, when she already was married to an abusive husband and had 4 children, met an NGO worker who came to her region to do some development work. And they had these conversations with the rural women about what their dreams are. And she said she never until then thought that she had the right to dream. And then basically 20 years later, this woman is now a PhD holder. Her 5 children all got university education by chance and by luck, but also by hard work. She got connected to very powerful people in the US when she went to study. And she then went back to Zimbabwe, built 11 schools with the support of these people. And, and this may sound like a Hollywood sort of story, but I was struck as I was listening to all these different interventions that at the webinars, maybe, there are some individuals who will come out of this who may be able to lead on these issues in their community. So I think that's very important. I do have a small sort of critical remark that I want to say, because it wouldn't be me if I didn't do that. I wanted to say there was a couple of times where I still heard people say things that probably put women in certain sort of like a stereotypical sort of moment. So there was a comment, for example, and I'm sorry to to pinpoint to that, but when there was this project where women were learning to weld, I think it was from Malaysia, and then somebody commented that underwater welding may not be suitable for women. Why not? Maybe there are women who want to do underwater welding. So, I was wondering about how we, even as gender experts and people who are trying to champion women and women's participation, may sometimes actually fall into the trap of this gender bias that we've all been socialized into. And so this is something that I would like to really, for people to take away, that we still have, all of us, even as enlightened as we may feel that we are in this area of our work, we still have things to learn, and we still have to be careful about how we talk about women. There were comments about how women in rural areas are not as eloquent or not able to speak up on some of these issues, and that was another thing that I wanted to say is, are we talking to them in their language? Do we come with a dominant language from whatever that culture is, and then we don't speak to these women in a language that they can express themselves? Are we really creating the platforms on which women can stand and then empower themselves, or are we trying to empower them in a way that we believe is the right way? So I think, those are the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to these things. So these are kind of my thoughts, a little bit, all over the place, but there's a lot of inspirational stuff there. I really look forward to seeing these projects continue and finding ways how we can collaborate. As Global Water Partnership at a global level, we don't really do small projects ourselves, but we're always looking for opportunities of partnering and supporting grassroots projects through our regional and country water partnerships. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from people. I'll put my email contact in the chat, and I welcome people to contact me and my colleagues from the regions and the countries to continue this conversation. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. This is very nice. And indeed, we have to be careful on how we put women in certain boxes. Actually, talking about the welding, I even got the impression that welding would be good for women because they are more agile, and then everything they need is less heavy to sort of dive into the water. But anyway, that's a different discussion. So we will look into that definitely. And you made a correct point that we shouldn't put them into boxes. We are running a little bit late, so I think we very, very quickly will go to the questions and answers. And Leonie Pearson is the Senior Research Fellow, Water for SEI Asia, and her work is focused on securing vulnerable people's access and rights to water through high-impact research from the Stockholm Environmental Institute SummerNet program. And Leonie has worked for more than 2 decades at the intersection of sustainability and collaborative engagement. Leonie, there are already quite a number of questions, and I think I'll better give you the floor. In the meantime, what we also will do is we will put a poll up where all the participants and of course all the panelists can react to, and we will look at that and come back to that later. But the question and answer is for you, and thank you for joining us. Leonie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the panel for, I think, some really interesting perspectives coming perhaps more from a global approach rather than from our case studies that we've heard over the last couple of weeks, which were much more bottom up, I think, in their approach to women, water, and climate change. We do have a lot of comments out at the moment, and I'm going to try and group these together. So I'm going to ask our panel, which was a very informative panel. Firstly, there was a really nice comment by Deepa that said we should not fix women, but we should fix the system. And there's a couple of questions related to that that have come up. One of them was about, what was one of the questions? Sorry. But one of the questions was around the idea that, for example, we talk about with data, we need disaggregated data so we can have gender policy. So could we think about these ideas that we actually, how do we change a system so that we actually get women engaged in decision making from the beginning, rather than try to change a gender policy area, which may or may not relate to the water issue? Can I open that up to the panel?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, actually. I think the change not only needs to come indeed from, the change needs to come in different areas simultaneously. Like, we need awareness on all different levels. We need awareness bottom up, but also up from top down. We need to raise awareness within the communities. At the same time, we need to make sure that even decision makers are well informed so they can make these evidence-based policies, which are based on the data. So your question was, how exactly can we, could you repeat the last part of the question, please?
So the question is, how can we start to change the system? So how do we intervene into this system to change it? So we're not looking at fixing women, we're looking at changing a system that's therefore inclusive.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's not a shortcut, I think, or a very simple solution. As I said, it needs to happen on different levels. For example, in terms of projects, we need to make sure that gender considerations are not only added in there in the last phase of a project. We need to make sure that it is considered and integrated from the start of the implementation or the development of the very project. So it's really a big work that consists of awareness raising among project managers, decision makers, community members, and so on. But to me, I would say that in my personal opinion, that the two more crucial areas are data, which we are lacking, which is needed to inform all levels. And on the other hand, we need capacity building, because we still see that, for example, from speaking from my experience within my function at WWAP, we can see that during these trainings, when we address policymakers, decision makers, that there are indeed gaps in the knowledge on gender equality and even basic gender-related issues. So I think we have to absolutely address this, and one step at a time. So far, I would also like to give, of course, the floor to the other experts to give their opinion on this.
Lisa, can I ask? Oh, sorry, Teresa, please jump in.
Well, okay. May I just join this conversation? I mean, the system itself is probably produced by men. Yeah, like most systems in the world, and every system and every area of life. Yeah, you need to change several sort of you need to change attitudes. You need to change culture. It's difficult to change culture, I've got to say. I'm an anthropologist myself. You've got to change behavior. When you do all that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to change gender relationships. Gender relationships need to be changed at every level in society, at every scale, like what was mentioned by Lawrence. You attack what, that the government needs to act. That needs to be filtered down to the bottom. There's the bottom-up approach as well. Systems are not, systems are produced by people. They just don't come out of, thin air. So I think I want to make that point. A short one though, but I think it's an important point.
I think you're right. And I think the fact that we have agency to change these systems, we have the capacity to make a difference, is a great place for this Q&A to be focused. I'd like to throw over to Lisa and ask if she has perhaps an example from some of her global water partnerships about where some systems have changed or institutions have changed and really been more incorporating of a wider integrative approach. We talk about women here. Many of our case studies were women and youth. Do you have something you'd like to share with us?
So I want to go a little bit back to the question about fixing. You mentioned this. Deepa said this, and your question was around that. And then I'll bring in an example. But what I wanted to say was, until we address the fact that there is gender inequality, right, and that we don't tiptoe around this fact, which we often do. We in this work, and like Deepa said, we now recognize that we shouldn't change the women, we should change or fix the women, we should fix the system. But still, there is, when you have conversations, you take, oh, women should be more like this, women should be more like that. Even when I have conversations with colleagues from the regions, when we're trying to address the fact that we don't have women in senior positions. So these conversations have to happen. And we have to have often uncomfortable conversations, I would say. And I think that's the first part of the fixing. I think it's, addressing how are we doing these things in our own daily practices. If we want to make sure that women participate in the processes, we have to make sure that we don't create barriers through our biases, through our, through, Teresa was just saying this very importantly, that, it's, the systems are there, the change takes very long time. And I think that changing social and cultural norms takes an awful lot of conversations and discussions that happen at different levels. So we have to have the data to support this, and I'm very much with Lawrence on this. And I wish we could, we could just do. I keep saying to my colleagues, "Oh, we need data, we need data, we need data," but we're not a research organization, so we are also going to count on, on Lawrence's team and others to partner and do projects where more data is generated on these issues. But for example, we have a big program currently ongoing in 5 African countries, and we hope to expand it also to the Asia regions, where we're looking at gender transformative change in the field of water and climate policies. And we're supposed to help governments to make decisions that will influence more gender transformative investment into climate in these countries. But what is interesting is, as we're having conversations with our team members in the different regions, every time we come back to the fact that we inside the house need to change our practices so that we can then influence these governments and these boundary partners that we work with. So I think that this is the thing, this is the homework that we all need to do. And I keep thinking, it's like when we're talking about racism or any kind of systemic injustice that is out there, we all play a role in it. And that's the thing that I want to keep coming back to. I don't think there's like a step, like a guidelines that I could say this works. But I've been very inspired by a work by a woman called Michelle King, who wrote the book called The Fix. It's a bestseller right now, I think, in the sort of gender inequality at work, mostly from a Western perspective. But she really talks about this fact that we have accepted there's an idea of a male type of leader who looks a certain way, usually an able-bodied white man, and that we all need to look like him, and that, you know, often even women perpetuate this sort of ideal of this kind of leadership. So this kind of transformative thinking has to start with us. And I think that, you know, that's where I would say having uncomfortable conversations, of course, but also putting quotas there and making sure that women participate, but then ensuring that this participation is valuable and meaningful and not just counting women in a room and things like that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've covered off a couple of different points of that. There's certainly more points in the comments and chat section as well. So people jump on and have a look there. The second set of questions I'd like to jump to that has been raised is about financing. And maybe our next panel will touch on this as well. But as we've got such a great cadre of people, I'd like to ask. So the question comes from Amrita, which is, how do we leverage financial support to youth and women-led projects, especially in the context of grassroots work to upscale the model and strategies in replicating the required dimensions of the case studies that we've seen, so the sorts of outcomes that we've seen. I was wondering if Deepa might like to jump on and be able to share some thoughts on this, or perhaps there's someone else on the panel that would like to. No. Seems like we've lost Deepa, or she can't hear us. Lisa or Lawrence, would you like to?
I am here. Sorry, Leonie.
Please.
I didn't quite get the question. Could you kindly repeat it again?
Certainly. The question is about how do we leverage financial support for the sorts of case studies and examples that we've seen throughout this conference to work from the grassroots and upscale those into models and strategies that could be applied in different contexts or in a wider regional setting.
Okay, so I'm not a financial expert and I'm not an economist. So a bit of a difficult spot for me to answer this question. But I think, Leonie, fundamentally, I think when we look at what is responsible for the fact that 2.4 billion people lack sanitation and half the number lack access to safe drinking water, water supply for domestic use, I think it boils down to the fact that if you look at the national budgets across these developing countries and you look at the finances that have been allocated for water supply and sanitation, they're clearly not comparable to meeting these gaps. So fundamentally, I think, you know, I think the entire development community, in my view, and maybe that's a bit of a radical view, does great disservice by, in one way, by sort of intervening in small pockets and areas through projects and programs, because it in some way legitimizes the underspending by the national governments, which is, you know, if you, I mean, yes, you're talking about poor countries, but if you look at the proportionate spending, for example, in India on defense and on water supply and sanitation, there's a clear argument to be made for much more concerted investment in these areas. And Isha Ray, you've probably heard of her from from the United States, who's worked long and hard on these issues, talks about that the fact that these are transformational investments that have to be made by the government in these supposedly mundane sectors like water supply, sanitation, energy for domestic use, etc., which have consistently, been under budgeted for across national governments. So on the one hand, by intervening and addressing these gaps, the entire global development community, obviously with very good intentions to provide services to the unserved and underserved, but in some ways it's also legitimizing the underspending of national governments. So the question then arises as to, how do you negotiate? So I don't think I'm really answering the question that was thrown to me. How do you create more money for these sort of projects and programs? Because I think that to me is not the way forward. I think for me, the way forward is that the funding for these initiatives by various external actors, including the private sector, must not happen, without negotiation and bargaining for intervention by national governments and improvement in spending for WASH. So I think I've probably turned the question on its head, but this is what I would really like to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Deepa. I actually think it's an important issue that it's not a single entity that delivers on any of these projects, that these are about partnerships and collaborations for success. And as such, we need to be not looking to one, or you said that there is a need for the government to do it, but I think there are multiple partners and players that can make these a success. Would others like to address the question about financing of these projects and how to scale them up?
I see Lisa unmuted her mic, so maybe she wants to go ahead.
Yes, I wouldn't mind. I want to say just shortly that I think that there's a lot of opportunities right now. Donors are under pressure to deliver on gender-related issues. So, and let's be honest, that often, of course, also donors just jump on this wagon and will finance things just to tick a box. But if this is an opportunity for projects to do something meaningful, why not get money from someone who doesn't know really why they're doing it, but it gives you an opportunity to do good work. So I think that that's, sometimes it's a trade-off. But I think there's opportunity to educate donors and governments who work with donors. From what I understand, in different regions, it's different ways, but a lot of the donors will give money to the governments to then implement projects. So partnering and getting the buy-in from the government wherever the project is working may be important also, in addition to just getting the donor funds. But I would say there are opportunities. Gender transformative approaches are the sexy phrase right now in a lot of the development funding. So I would say there are opportunities, and it is a momentum that needs to be used. But of course, taking into account everything that Deepa said, it's not, we can't just do this without thinking about the implications that our work has on the people we work with.
Great. And Lisa, can I just follow up with a specific question? When you say donors, could you please either provide an example or a group when you talk about donors in this case?
So, for example, in the case of GWP, we have been we're currently supported by several governments. So, for example, the government of Austria and the development funds there, they were particularly interested in having a project that would have gender marker 2 according to the OECD gender markers. And they came to us to work and develop a project that is really about gender transformative approaches in water and climate sector in Africa. So, for example, that's one case. You have governments that have whose development policies are based on feminist principles, and they are particularly also interested. I think it's Canada, Australia and Finland, or, I'm not 100% sure, but I know that there are 3 governments that have, for example, feminist development policy. So those are, good to work with. Under the SDG work, again, a lot of pressure to develop gender-focused work and align all the SDGs with the gender SDG. So I think there are many opportunities, and I don't think there is a single donor right now that would accept a project that didn't have at least some gender element. So I think that's a good sign.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know we have other panelists that might like to jump in, but I feel our time has just come to an end. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. And whilst we only addressed 2 questions, we did get a chance to explore some of the issues around looking at institutional change and looking at financing for more work on the ground. So I think they're 2 important elements. Please jump into the Q&A, into the chat section and the Q&A, and we'll be sharing some of the results of those. So thank you. Thank you, Marriott, very much for the time.
Well, thank you, Leonie. It's really nice, and there are a lot more questions which we will answer. But I was thinking maybe also after the when we have listened to the closing plenary of the 3 presentations there, we could maybe come back and listen a little bit to other impacts, and the finance issue might even be addressed in that part. So thank you. It was very nice, and I hope you'll stay with us and maybe can join after the closing plenary. So now, the closing plenary, we have 3 short interventions of 3 extraordinary experts, and we hope that especially the young water professionals who we involved and who were very involved in the different webinars and case studies we presented, I hope that they will come back to these interventions and make remarks or give their input and their insight. So let's start with the first panelist in this plenary, and that is Sudarshana Yayasundara. He is a senior social development and gender specialist at the ADB, the Asian Development Bank Sri Lanka country office. He carries over 13 years of experience in international development, working with diverse non-governmental, bilateral and multilateral agencies. And his area of expertise includes gender equality and social inclusion, monitoring and evaluation, education and community development. So Sudarshana, I know that you also like women to participate in STEM education and employment. So can we have your view from your experience and your points from the ADB? We are interested in listening to your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marriott, and I think that was a very kind introduction from your side. I would like to just move on from the immediate discussion we have had on the financing, the investment for women, water, and climate change. And particularly, I think I was prepared to discuss a little bit on how we can, what are the avenues, the opportunities there are out there that can be tapped for the work related to women, water, and climate change. And it was very appropriate that we just finished on a short discussion and a Q&A session on this financing part. So some of the things that I was prepared to speak was also spoken, especially by Lisa, but maybe I'll try to build upon on that conversation. So as Majid said, I have been working with a large number of non-government organizations in the past, and also several bilateral agencies and multilateral organizations, especially working with the Asian Development Bank at the moment. So what I have, the point that I'm going to share is my general observations about the investment opportunities, the funding opportunities that are available in these from these organizations, especially from bilaterals and the multilateral donor agencies, for the work on gender equality, women's empowerment, especially on this area of women, water, and climate change. So what I have seen in my work with a number of bilateral and multilateral organizations is that there is a significant and increasing focus on the area of engaging with the civil society organizations. And this comes actually from a couple of agencies such as Japan, government of Japan, government of Australia, and government of United States, especially the USAID program, with some specific funding that are made available for innovative work from the civil society organizations or NGOs. And once a year, I've seen that these funding envelopes are made available with very little of criteria and sort of selection criteria, and can quite comfortably be tapped by the organizations that are working, especially the civil society organizations that are working in the areas of gender, climate change. And even if you look at the multilateral organizations, agencies such as ADB, World Bank, AIIB, there is increasing focus to work with civil society organizations. And these organizations, the bilaterals, they generally fund the government, the government counterparts, the ministries of finance in the respective government, or the other ministries that executes their multi-million projects. But most of these organizations, especially in the case of Asian Development Bank, we have separate division that work on NGO coordination, civil society coordinations. And the work that we do with civil societies, especially the work that multilateral organizations do with civil societies, includes partnering with some of the innovative work that these NGOs or the civil society organizations implement, as well as critically involving them in the discussions and the consultations of maybe a country partnership strategy or in the design of a new project. So just to hear the views and views of these agencies, both from a development perspective and also from a social and environmental safeguard perspective. And that being said, I should also mention that, as Lisa exactly pointed out, this focus on gender equality and women's empowerment is being talked about by I would say every bilateral multilateral organization. And this is thanks to the work by the feminist organizations, women's rights activists and organizations in the past. I think there is increasing focus among these organizations and in their strategies to look at to support the gender equality and women's empowerment work. And that is another platform that makes funding available for most of the work that are being done at the grassroots level. But having said that, one of the key issues I find, one challenge that I see in the work that we do in bilateral and multilateral organizations is that the important topics such as climate change, gender equality, women's empowerment, disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction, these things comes as, I would say, thematic areas, so cross-cutting areas. So the focus that some of the projects, some of the programs would have on this cross-cut, thematic areas can vary from one country to the other, one context to the other, and even based on the project officer who would design or manage a project, or the team that would design and manage a project. So that becomes one of the disadvantages to bring more focused interventions in the area of these women, water, and climate change. But at the same time, it also creates an opportunity for us to look at on how we can bring more, how we can sort of advocate for more resources. So one thing that we should actually look at when we work with when we look at the programming of the multilateral organizations such as World Bank, ADB, and AIIB, that their focus is completely on the sectoral aspect. So we, for example, in Asian Development Bank in Sri Lanka, we work on transport sector, we work on energy sector, education, agriculture, and more particularly the urban and water and sanitation. So the key point that the work that the civil societies, the networks, the grassroots level organizations that work on issues of women, water, and climate is to see how their work, their innovative approaches can be integrated into the sectoral dimensions of these large-scale programs and projects. And the other key few points that I'm just trying to finish in the next 1 or 2 minutes, but one few areas that we should look at when we bring this conversation about funding and financing is that the multi-million projects funded by these multilateral organizations are not only supporting, I mean, there are important development impact, but any development impact can also have negative impacts as well. So whenever we implement a project such as the agriculture or water supply and sanitation, there can be issues of environmental safeguard, social safeguard, and these organizations have inbuilt systems to address, to mitigate and address some of these negative impacts of environment and social systems, including through community consultations with local organizations, women's rights organizations, environmental organizations, and also establishing community grievance mechanisms and systems to compensate the people who are being negatively affected. So these systems can also be creatively utilized to look at how potential negative impacts of development work can be transformed, and how the funding opportunities available to mitigate those negative impacts can be diverted to support the women, water, and climate change initiatives. And the final point I just want to share is that all these organizations, be it multilateral or bilateral organizations, they are increasingly talking about innovations, research, data sciences, big data science, networking, and also forums and conferences that share best practices. I just want to bring one example from the work that we did in a network called WePower, Women in Power Sector, where World Bank initiated an ADB joint with them to bring women engineers and women professionals into a forum in all the South Asian countries to increase their participation and leadership. And World Bank is just heading a similar network on WWAP, women in a water sector. So these sort of professional networks, bodies are becoming more increasingly a platform that can work with these multilateral organizations and create a platform for dialogue, innovations, and also for sharing resources. And
thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I'll stop there. I'm sorry, I've taken a few more minutes than I expected. Thank you.
No, don't worry. Thank you very much. Finances is a big issue, so I think that also needs time. But we do find that it's very difficult for NGOs and women organizations to get to these finances. But we have talked about that. The next presenter will be Christian Severin. He is the coordinator of the Global Environment Facility, International Waters focal area, and manages the local areas engagement across geographical regions as well as globally. He has been working for the GEF since 2005. The GEF is the largest funding mechanism for multi-country collaboration on shared water and marine resources, with 156 GEF recipients countries and 24 non-recipient countries working together to manage their transboundary water resources. So, Christian, the floor is yours, and good morning. I know it's very early for you.
Good morning. Yes, it is rather early here in Washington, D.C. So thank you so much for inviting me today. And before we get started, I just want to make a short clarification to you, Lisa, because you pointed out earlier we often end up in all-male panels, and I will tell you that we were invited to this panel, and I do realize we are 3 able-bodied men sitting in the panel, but I think that the organizers have thought about that before they actually invited us. But anyway, just a short note. Because it came to my mind, I'm very cautious about this whenever I join the panels these days, that we have a fair representation of everybody that are part of the processes. So for the GEF, as was just said, we are a fairly large funder. We have, apart from the roughly $2 billion that we have managed over since 1992 within international waters, the GEF as a total have given up grants around 20 billion over the last close to 30 years, and with a total co-financing for around $107 billion. So this is a fairly big organization. We are very lean. Our main office in DC, and our only office, that is, we roughly have 75 people working, managing this amount of money. So we are trying our best to adhere to all these different policies and requirements coming down from countries, donors, and just from being a global stakeholder. We do also manage something called the Small Grants Program, and I think that's very relevant to some. I saw a lot of the chat comments just over the last couple of minutes. And the Small Grants Program is indeed set up for supporting CSOs and NGOs globally. And if you look at the website, both the GF but also UNDP have a site that actually talks to this. There are some very distinct publications talking about the role of women as environmental custodians, and I think that is actually the main point here, that it's really important to think about. When we look historically at this, I mean, since I was said, I've been in the GF for a while. When I started, it was not really a big issue. It was not really there. Gender aspects were talked about, but not really. There was not really anything really embedded into the project structure. Whereas in 2011, we did come up with a framework, a mainstreaming, a GEF policy and gender mainstreaming, together with all our partners, of course, all the GEF agencies. And that has since then been applied. So it's not something I mean, I think we can all do better, but we have been trying at least for the last nearly 10 years and ensuring that this is part of our projects. So this means that if any country wants money from the GF, they need to make sure that they're gender mainstreaming, and all these different policies, there's 10 or 15 indicators that needs to be addressed. And it's not only about the disaggregated sexual data. I mean, to me, it's easy to count. We can all tally up, say, oh, this many men, this many women in a meeting, but that to me makes very little difference. And when you start looking at decision making and so forth, so I think it's a good indicator. It's fine, it's there, but it's not really talking about the change that needs to happen. And but anyway, so we have this framework of different indicators that are now being applied very rigidly throughout all our projects, from very early inception, from concept idea all the way through implementation. And this means that it forces countries, governments, NGOs, CSOs, and so forth throughout the whole project cycle to actually embed these into the reporting structure. And you know, I know it's just one little part of the financing sector that we are part of, but still, if we ask that, that means that then if there's any loans associated with this financing, they also have to adhere to the same, right? At least to some extent. So it's a conversation starter. It has meant that a lot of organizations now have this fully fledged, and it also drips into governmental processes. And I think that's where it needs to be heading, right? We need to find out how do we ensure that there's this shift of gender inclusion and indicators that are able to capture some of the mainstreaming going on. How do we do that? And I don't think we have the answer now. I think that we can all be smarter on this, and it's as I said, it's a process, but we have to start somewhere. And we came up with these indicators. It was an interesting process. I was part of the whole thing, and I've been working on this issue for a number of years now, so yeah, 10, 11 years at least. I will say just a couple of reflections on where we are right now. COVID, as we unfortunately all are working with and around and in the middle of, I think it forces a behavioral change on both on financing, but just everybody in general. And so there is this opportunity everybody's talking about that we have to change and make sure that we build back greener, bluer. And there's this green blue recovery process that needs to be mainstreamed to financing. But also think that this COVID and this whole talk about how do we make sure we build back in a more sustainable way. I think it actually includes a paradigm shift that we can use to make sure we include both gender in this whole project cycle, and in policy processes, decision making processes, and so forth. Simply because we need to think differently. I mean, we are in front of one of the biggest crises since the Second World War, I think, globally, financially, and so this will mean it has a huge impact, and we need to find out how do we deal with that. And we cannot do that if we only focus on 50% of the population. It's simply impossible. It would be absolutely stupid. I was very happy. I was only able to hear a couple of the comments this morning, but I was very happy to hear some of the examples, these local examples that, to me, I think there's a very interesting local global interaction here. This pertains to the examples we heard from some of the technologies being tested, but also think the gender movement. So we are a global organization. We started something here that, I mean, we didn't start anything, but we have been part of this process of ensuring that we at least have gender mainstreaming indicators, and the projects are sensitive to all these issues around policy changes and so forth. But that's a global level, but at the same time, we also are very much learning from the local level. And so I think there's a very important crossroad there that we need to make sure is wide open, so we can ensure we don't sit up coming up with global things that are impossible to implement, and vice versa, where we can learn. I think there's also some dripping from global level, having some indicators that maybe that'd be easier to adapt to in a local setting, in a government setting, in a commune, or whatever it is. On capacity building, we have been dealing quite a lot with this within international waters. We have a process called IWLearn. It's a capacity building knowledge management process that's been running for 20 years within the GF International Waters portfolio. And in here, we have been working with and continuously try to become better at working and ensuring gender is part of all our projects and a part of reporting and so forth. So there are certain tools that are already available that we have developed together with our project stakeholders, and I would hope that you can have a look at that when you have time. And finally, I want to say, I mean, to me, one thing that always comes across, it doesn't matter whatever subject we talk about. It could be gender, it could be environment, it could be water security, whatever it is. It's always about building trust and understanding the partners you're with. So, I mean, the first thing is to have more of what we're doing right now, and also make sure that we have all the stakeholders there. So we not only have NGO people there, we also need the government, and we need all gender groups, both gender groups represented. So I think that is a very important part of it. So we need to keep on raising the flag to demystify this, so it's not, so nobody is afraid of losing power, but you can see that you can actually gain both financial power and also political power if we do this together. there are some great examples from around the world where this is possible. So I think to me, it's this is the starting point, building trust, and I think we need to use the science to policy. That is a very important and very impossible at the same time part of what we're doing here. And I think that's what we can drive. We have the data sets, as Lauren talked about earlier. That's part of the answer to this. But the most important part to me is building trust, and I'm hopeful that I can be part of that process together with you. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today, and also the continuous process from here. Thank you so much.
I'll better unmute myself. Thank you very much. And I can already see a question on that, but I think if we have time, we can come back to you on that. And that's why I would like to continue with Tom Mollenkopf. He is passionate about the central role that water and sanitation play in the social, environmental, and economic well-being of our societies. He is also a firm believer in the power of constructive engagement and evidence-based decision-making as the foundation of sound policy. Tom is a board member and president-elect of the International Water Association, IWA, and he is an independent advisor on policy, strategy, and governance. Tom, the floor is yours, and we might come back with some questions to the three of you.
Great. Mariette, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this really very important conference. I wanted to take a slightly different approach in my remarks. Many of you will be aware of the Japanese proverb, "Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare." And throughout the course of this conference, what we've seen is a series of inspirational and practical case studies. And they've been driven by a powerful vision, but they have meaning because they've been action-oriented and results-driven. The vision of this conference, the theme, as all effective visions are, is a powerful one. It tackles three critical issues: gender inequity, inadequate planning and delivery of water and sanitation, and inaction around climate change. So for me, what's resonated with the presentations over the course of this conference is the pivotal role that leadership plays. So for some of us, when we look at these presentations, we see technically clever or practical elements. And we in the water sector love our engineering solutions. I'm not an engineer, so maybe that's why what I find energizing is that the projects we have seen demonstrate not only sound technical and scientific elements, but also community and political engagement, an energy, a passion, a desire to see change for the better, and action to back it up. So, I mean, maybe if I can ask those who are watching, listening, to think, what do they think is great leadership? I mean, can they think of a fabulous leader? In my day job as the CEO of the Peter Cullen Water and Environment Trust, I ask candidates in our leadership programs this question, and many of them come back with classic responses around, they will give an example of a great political leader, Mahatma Gandhi, or George Washington, or Nelson Mandela, or the current New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. But the answer I remember most was from a young woman who described her grandmother as the finest example of a leader. Her grandmother had no formal qualifications. She had no executive management role. She didn't seek political office, but she activated her community through fundraising efforts, through local initiatives like establishing a food cooperative for unemployed people in her town, or agitating for a multi-gender sports facility, and by making sure that people felt welcome at local events or actively encouraging others to take on community roles. She was a connector, someone who didn't just talk about things, she did things. And at a time when I think so many of us feel that our political leaders are not offering us leadership, we have a choice. We can become disillusioned and disengaged, or we can take action and be leaders ourselves. The International Water Association plays a key role in leadership. Its vision is a world in which water is wisely, sustainably and equitably managed. And its tagline is, in fact, inspiring change. If we think about the themes of this conference, IWA is clearly actively at the forefront of raising awareness about the impacts of climate change and water. But only in recent years has it turned its attention to gender equity and social inclusiveness. We have our own challenge. We must continue to do this because it enriches our programs and it provides additional insights and approaches that make us more effective. And because it's equitable, it's the right thing to do. IWA's focus over recent years, over its life, in fact, has been mostly around good science and practice. We've been very good in our engagement with academic and research sectors, and we have strong engagement with utility practitioners. And I think this technical focus mirrors the approach of many participants in the water sector. But to return to my thesis, while good science is critical, it's not enough. For us to be truly effective, good science must inform policy. If we're to have evidence-based decision making, we must be able to engage with policymakers in terms that they understand and in terms that will drive action or change on their part. And this again is where leadership plays such a critical role. I'm mindful that time is marching on, and you can tell that I'm incredibly passionate about the opportunities for us to convert our technical knowledge to action through offering leadership. I think it's our responsibility to do this at a local level, at a regional level, at a national level, and at a global level. I'll move on. But before I conclude my remarks, I do want to make one other observation, though, that I think we've touched on in this conference, and it's around the important role that young water professionals play and the responsibility that we have in providing them with a platform. Someone observed to me that it's very often problematic in Asian cultures where it's the grey hair that gives people the stage. Sadly, it's not just in Asian cultures. I think this is entrenched across many cultures, but it would be arrogant, I think, for us to think that only older professionals have the knowledge, have the answers. But it would also be dangerous to exclude the fresh approaches, the innovation and the enthusiasm of our emerging water leaders. And so I think one of the things that I carry forward into my term as president of IWA, and I hope that others will embrace, is the opportunity not just for us to be strong around gender equity, social inclusion, but also around avoiding ageism. So I guess my final comment then is that I'm very happy to commit to the themes of this conference: women, water and climate. And I hope that I'll be able to join with you in pursuing that agenda. Mariette, thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Sorry, Tom. Thank you very much. This is very enlightening, and it's indeed, leadership is important. It is, and we already, as we in this case as Women for Water Partnership, we already try to really get women on the stage, get the leadership from women, and try to educate and make people aware of women leadership. That is something that is very, very important. You were talking about recently we are looking at gender equality and women involvement. I must say we already started in 1992. I mean, that might be recent for you, but that is the Dublin Principle 3, where for the first time women were included in the to be pivotal for the water sector. And in 1995 in Beijing, it was the first time that really we said we need not women taking over, but join together, collaborate, cooperate, and to have leadership from women as well. So I think all your remarks have been really, really helpful and sort of pinpointed on what we have been trying to sort of bring forward with all these different case studies. I think that looking at the time that we will react to all the questions that have come in, and we will send them to you if you haven't answered them yet. But I think the closing remarks and the wrap up will be best done by Kusum. And Kusum has a deep interest in crossing disciplinary and academic boundaries, from languages and cultural studies to development studies, primarily environmental related. And over the decades has become an internationally recognized multidisciplinary skill development professional. Her work in environmental studies covers water resource management and advocacy, principally focusing on a range of ground level issues in Sri Lanka, including catchment conservation and ecosystem awareness for communities and schools in the tea estates of Sri Lanka. But you have heard a lot about that. So I would like to give the floor to Kusum to sort of for her closing remarks. Thank you, Kusum.
Thank you very much, Marit. Ayubowan to everyone. And thank you very much being with us here. It's been a long march for gender and water, and the long march continues. So we are very happy to have you as partners. Let me start off by thanking SCI for supporting this activity. At the beginning of the year, when this triumvirate of partners, Soroptimist, Women for Water, and NetWwater, got the grant from SCI, we were delighted, we were absolutely thrilled. And we started planning for the in-person conference in Sri Lanka. But soon the ambulances started, sirens started all over the world. The bells started to toll, and we were almost all of us were in total lockdown. The Sri Lankan group, the planning team, went through multiple changes, from the perils of having no electricity, no power, no internet, monkeys jumping on transformers, partners going into quarantine lockdown, you name it, we had it. And but we have sort of worked our way through with the support of the three international organizations, displaying the resilience, the collective commitment, and the passion for water to this point where we are able to come to the successful closure of this activity. Let me start off by thanking Honorable Dinesh Gunawardena, Minister of Foreign Affairs. It was no easy task for the very senior cabinet minister to come and take time with us in this pandemic period. Almost all of us are in quarantine lockdown. But the minister has a long-term interest and a track record in passionate commitment to water and water security. So we were very pleased to have at his inspirational address as chief guest. And at the same point, I would like to remind all of us of the outcome of the Hague Forum in the year 2000, the World Water Forum, where we were talking about accessing political decision makers. And this is an activity that I think we need to go back to and remind ourselves once in a while at least. We were also very fortunate to have the former Minister of Water of Nepal, Deepak Gewali. Deepak, whenever he comes on stage or on the Zoom, he pricks our conscience. He prods us to look beyond our comfort zone. And his comments on the eagle science and the toad science, it emphasizes the underlying themes of this conference, the need to look beyond the water management agencies and the ministries to the point of view of the lowest possible level of communities, especially the most underprivileged, the women and children there. And also in parallel, the role of the community catalysts and social auditors in creating these communities to have a voice. So when we talk about Deepak, he would bring us to the plight of the Nepali laborer who's supposed to be, having hand washing as their only protection against COVID. But with 3 liters of water a day, how do they wash their hands, have their dal bath, and also wash their bottoms? I would like to thank the case holders who have been with us throughout this activity. Calcutta, West Bengal, Bangkok, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia. Meena, Ampai, Amrita, Dilipa, Ayla, you have been great partners, and you have brought us the issues that we want to highlight in the most productive manner. So thank you very much. And again, I also need to I don't know how to thank the moderators, the international experts, and most of all, the young water professionals who answered our call, who stuck by us through this difficult time, and who all of us collectively managed to create exactly what we want to do. We want to have this platform talking about women, water, and climate, and you made it come alive. You made it speak for itself. So thank you very much for all the work that you did. Misaka and the Sri Lankan team, we were very disappointed when Voice of Water didn't happen, because this was our chance to create a comprehensive, cohesive platform and bring in decision makers, political decision makers in. But the corona beat us to it. But challenging the tyranny of the status quo is where we are standing and where we would want to take this activity further. So thank you very much, all of you from the Sri Lankan team once more. Coming to the panelists and your comments, I'm probably not going to do justice to the activities that you have pinpointed, the issues that you have raised, and the way forward that you have given us. So giving so generously of your experience and your expertise. Deepa, I really need to talk about this entrenched inequalities and the corridors of power, and how these transformative approaches that we have been talking about has been, should be a point of reflection for the way forward. Lawrence, again, thank you for coming here from WWAP. And we are talking about your words reinforcing the need for data, sex aggregated data, and the capacity building which goes with it. Thank you also for your comment on the Singharaja forest. Here, I would like to say that, the Sri Lankan team is standing on the shoulders of giants, champions of environmental and water issues who had gone before us, and in supporting the protection of our water towers. And I would like very much to mention one particular person who passed away recently, my good friend, the late Kamini Vitarana. Lisa, the comments that you have made, you know, I also thought of something. Why, you remember Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle? Why can't a woman be more like me? So perhaps, you know, we do need to talk about even this small point of women not being able to talk really resonates with me, because in every farmer organization that I have gone to, the women said, oh, we don't know how to talk. We don't know what to tell. This is not the language, especially in a country like Sri Lanka, where you have two registers, a spoken register and a written register. The written register, you know, is the educated people talking, you know, the higher register. And the women say, oh, we don't know how to talk there. But I'm also reminded of this IHE trained engineer when we had the first ever training for NetWwater, came and said, I have only done one presentation in my life, and that was for my MSc at IHE. So maybe we need to talk and about women learning to talk across the different borders. Transformation investments for talking with the donors, the states, the collaboration in getting this donor state activity together. I'm reminded of the Voice of Water and the banker from Mr. Hemantha, who talked about ROI, return on investment. Maybe we need to work on explaining to these agencies, the multilaterals, the best return on investment that they can get is by investing on women. Chris, thank you very much for talking about the change which needs to happen in the larger sector and the role of Jeff. And I've been pointing that COVID could be a disaster, which we can turn into an opportunity. If we can use it to get this behavioral change, and if we can use the pandemic as a challenge, not as something where we, you know, go into our holes and say, oh boy, I'm going to have it, you know, this is all, this has finished my life, it has finished my activity. No, this is a challenge. And here, this is where we would like from NetWwater to go into our AAA. If I lean back, you can see the triple A's. Awareness, advocacy, and water. This is the time we talk about awareness, because we can't do it very much on the ground. But we can use this to plan for advocacy and then go into action. So thank you very much. Tom, you are always with us in this vision leading to action. What kind of vision? And that action without vision is a nightmare. The pivotal role of leadership, especially for young water professionals. This is something that IWA has told, which really resonates with me. And I do like the reference to the Asian notion of seniority, you know, bureaucracy. If you're old and senior, you will be listened to. And if you're junior, you know, get into a corner and wait your chance till you become senior. But our young water professionals, with your support, will be given all the opportunities. Let me highlight that the two people who came from Sri Lanka, one Dilipa and the other one Oshadi, are probably presenting for the first time internationally. We need to make these opportunities for them. And again, that good science must inform policy. Good science is what we've all tried to do, but good science does not only come from scientists, it also comes from people on the ground with their indigenous knowledge. So good science is bringing the two streams together. So thank you very much for that. Finally, as we head into the winter of our discontent collectively, with more lockdowns looming, instead of doom scrolling, instead of being on a extended Corona vacation, having our quarantine, let us, the privileged few who are on the right side of the digital divide, move, because the danger is very much there, that we would be very happy in our comfort zones, that we would become laptop warriors. Let us move into the awareness, advocacy, and action mode. And that way, we can become super spreaders of the water voice and flatten the curve of water insecurity. So, thank you very much, friends. And I leave you with this wish. Stay positive, but test negative. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kusum, for thanking everyone. Thank you to SEI again. Thank you to all our collaborative partners. Thank you very much. And I hope to stay in contact with all of you so that we can make a proper and impactful way forward, where all the items that we have highlighted will come forward. Thank you very much.